as we mentioned, the strategic plan has several components: the goals, the analysis of environment, and then the resources and capabilities that you need to have in order to execute the goal. So now let's briefly talk about the resources and capabilities. What are the resources and capabilities, and why this is something that you need to understand, and why is not something that is part of strategic analysis? Now, as I already mentioned in my previous videos, no matter what kind of goals you have, it's difficult to execute those goals without the right resources. You might have a great idea on how to take on Apple, but if you don't have the manufacturing abilities, if you don't have the supply chain management tools, if you don't have the suppliers database, obviously if you don't have the right financial resources, the right people, you cannot compete with Apple. Well, that doesn't mean you cannot do something in the IT industry or consumer phone industry. You can create something else, but you probably cannot compete with Apple because you don't have the right resource. So in some sense, before you start creating any sort of strategic plan, it's a good idea to look at the resources that you have. And based on the resources, start building your strategic plan. This view on strategy is called resource view-based strategy, and basically, it's maybe I would say it's a prevailing view in academia and in strategic management theory that somehow distorts the general idea that first of all you set up big goals. You should set up big goals. Maybe that's not really the case. Maybe in the first of all you should really honestly look into what you have, what's the resources that you have at your disposal, and build based on that. You should be able to come up with a plan. I will upload okay, so we'll cut that. So the resources are threefold. Yeah, we can talk about resources. We can talk about tangible resources. Now, tangible resources are the resources that are you can touch, feel, smell. That's the resources that you can are physical in nature. Tangible resources. The good examples would be things like machines, cars, real estate, stock, inventory, and things like that. Then there's intangible resources. Intangible resources. Now, these resources are probably even more important for your competitive advantage than the tangible resources. Why is that so? It is because tangible resources are easy to get if you have the right kind of money. And money is always there. You can go to an investor, you can go to bank, get the right resource, buy the machine that the competition has, get the real estate that the competition has. Sometimes it's possible, right? But intangible resources like know-how are difficult to get. If you don't have the right know-how how to operate your business, where are you going to get it? Some know-how is available through consultants, but some is not, and companies are safeguarding it. So it's difficult then to compete with companies that have the right know-how which you don't have because you cannot get it, right? It's different from tangible resource that is about only question of money. This is a question of how can I get something that I don't have, the intangible resource. And therefore, the successful companies build their competitive advantage on intangible resources, such as brand, right? Or recipe in case of Coca-Cola. It's difficult to imitate. It's difficult to get for the competition. So tangible resource, intangible resource, and the last thing, it's probably the most important one, is the human resource. Obviously, the human resources are the most difficult to get when it comes to getting the right people, the best people. This is the greatest challenge that the companies are now faced with, right? So you take Google. Maybe there is companies that could take on Google, but they will never get the package of all the Google engineers, right? All the Google engineers. They would never be able to just remove them from Google and put it there in their company. And without all those people, it's very difficult to have the same capabilities as Google has, right? So the crucial people give you a great competitive advantage, are the most valuable resource, right? Now, I sometimes ask students, why do companies fail? I remember a case of company called Borders. It was a big mall it was a big bookseller, and that was mostly you could find its shops in various malls across USA. Now the Borders failed. I think it bankrupted in early 2010s. Well, you would say, oh well, it was obvious. I mean, the giant bookstores were not, or the bookstores were going through a radical period of change. The environment should change. If you did the best analysis, you would have to find out that the social component environment was changing in that sense, and it will affect negatively booksellers. However, some of the bookstores actually adopted and now are there. You can still go to a mall and buy a book in most of the malls, at least in Europe. But you cannot find their Borders. Why is that so? In Borders from the 1990s was fighting with Amazon. Both were selling books. Only Borders was selling offline, and Amazon was selling online. And when I ask students what should Borders do at that time, they would tell me that they should compete with Amazon, right? Because the Amazon was online, so Amazon was forward-looking. They knew that there was going to be change. The books will be sold online, and later on there will not be any physical books, but only electronic books. So Amazon knew that, right? Is it the correct way to look at it? That Borders should compete with Amazon? And I always ask, I don't have the detailed numbers because it's not public, but imagine that for the sake of comparison, in Amazon at that time, in 1996, there were 1,000 people working there. And imagine that in Borders, there's also 1,000 people working there in 1996, let's say. Who are those people? What are their jobs? What are their professions? What kind of resource is that? In Amazon, the chances are you would have 80% of IT engineers creating ever better platform to sell products online. In Borders, on the other hand, the chances are it's out of 1,000 people, maybe 800 of them, it's shop sellers, shop assistants, right? Well, then how can Amazon take those, Borders take those shop assistants and fight head on with Amazon, with those IT engineers? That was totally impossible. Already in the 1990s, Borders had no chance of competing with Amazon. The booksellers, they were traditional physical booksellers, had no chance in remaining in the books business and be competitive against these new IT giants, because the environment changed and the resources that they had were useless anymore to compete head on. Does that mean that Borders was destined to fail? Well, maybe and maybe not. Maybe they could have taken their resource, what they already had at the time, the shops and the people working there. Maybe they could use it for something else. Maybe they could, instead of books, they could start selling educational toys and have seminars there, and combined with coffee shops. And who knows, right? If they executed it as well, maybe they could still survive. But the key takeaway here is that they couldn't compete with the company. They didn't have the right resource. The same is for Kodak, right? Everybody says, Kodak should miss the rise of digital photography. But look at Kodak. What kind of company is that? It's a company making chemical products. Most of the films. That's what brought most of the money home when the Kodak was successful in the past. How can a company, which is basically a chemical company, have the right resource, the chemical engineers, the facilities to produce chemical components and stuff like that? How can they compete with the digital giants that have been always only in the industry of digital products, right? Canon, like Sony, like other successful manufacturers of digital cameras, when the digital cameras were still a thing. Yeah, another question is that it's not anymore, but at, let's say, late 1990s and 20s, 2000s, right? So Kodak really couldn't compete well with those digital producers, because the environment had changed and the resources that Kodak has were useless. For strategic leaders, so this has two implications. For strategy leader, first implication is the strategy leader needs to be aware of the resources that he has, right, at his disposal, and he needs to be constantly updating the I would say the database of the resource available, and should also think of, if there is a missing part of the puzzle, is there a resource that I don't have that will be very necessary to compete in the future. And if I found out I don't have the right resource, now I have two choices. I can build the resource or buy the right resource. So if I find out I don't have the right people, I might consider buying, hiring those people, or I might consider training that's like building, right? I may consider getting the resource from outside, hiring new people, or I might consider creating the resource within, right? Maybe training new people, right? If I don't have the right ability to, let's say, I'm a car manufacturer. Now, this is something that, for example, the established car manufacturers are faced with, like BMW and others, right? If they don't have the right resource, for sure. They're not IT companies and software companies. Their software sucks. For anybody who had a new BMW probably knows there's lots of glitches. Now, Tesla, for example, is maybe that is not such a great car manufacturer itself, right? In terms of like car technology, like steering and bump and tires and everything. But it's basically an IT company. So their software is way better than that of a BMW. So BMW is missing the right resource. Maybe 20 years from now, we'll be looking back and saying, well, BMW was destined to fail because it's a car manufacturing company and they don't have the right resource. They don't have this knowledge of how to produce great software. And 20 years from now, maybe it will be more important to have the right software in your car because the car will be safe driven than to have a good brakes and a good steering and good tires, these things that BMW can do well, right? Good suspension, yeah? So BMW is maybe missing the right resource currently, and now it's faced with the question, should I build the resource, should I establish a new department or part of my company, subsidiary, or should I go and buy a company that is already creating software that I need? That will be the buy path, right? Both of them has advantages and disadvantages, but the key takeaway here is that BMW, as well as any other company, needs to be well aware of the resources that they have and also the resources that they have missed. They need to adjust their strategy if they're missing resources that they cannot get, or they might decide to get the resource that they're missing and and keep their strategy intact. So this is this discussion of on the resources. There was a brief introduction to discussion on resources as part of strategic planning and building process.